Okay. Okay, I think we can, let's start, yeah? Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar organized by the European Network on Independent Living on housing and independent living. My name is Ines Bulic-Kojokariu. I am, oops, sorry, this is the, I can hear myself on YouTube, so okay, we are live streaming on YouTube. My name is Ines Bulic-Kojokariu. I work at the Secretariat of ENIL, and I'm very happy that we have here with us a great group of speakers who will share their insights and experiences in relation to housing. Just a couple of words of introduction before we start. First of all, I have to apologize. We were supposed to have the captioner here with us, but unfortunately, she hasn't arrived yet. So if she does, I will let you know. If not, we will make sure to add captions to the recording on YouTube. Second of all, we have, in case you would like to ask questions or make comments, please use either the chat box or the Q&A function. And please feel free to ask questions or make comments during the webinar. We will have 2 rounds of discussion after the first 2 or 3 speakers, and then again at the end. The first discussion will be moderated by Pidar, my colleague, and I will moderate the second one. We are supposed to have 1 more speaker with us, which is who is Andor Urmos. I don't see him here now, so I hope he will arrive during the webinar, but we do have a couple of speakers speaking before him in any case. So hopefully Andor will arrive. In case he does, then we will have a round of questions after his presentation. What else to say? I think just this is about it in terms of our agenda. Just to set a little bit of context why we decided to organize this webinar. Obviously, housing, access to affordable and accessible housing is a key issue for people to be able to live independently. And there are major concerns about housing across Europe. A lot of people still live in institutions and all sorts of residential care settings. And to be able to leave these institutions, they do need another place to live. They also need to be able to decide where they live and who they live with. So they should not be placed into another type of institutional care setting. We also have an issue that we have a lot of people who are under guardianship, so are not able to get into rental agreements or purchase a property, which is a major barrier to housing. And we have a lack of course, social housing, a lack of accessible housing, a lack of support to get into the right type of housing, a lack of support with adapting housing. So lots of different issues in relation to housing, all of which means that it's a huge barrier for a lot of people to live in the community. Today we're going to hear first of all from Tiandi, who is a self-advocate from the Netherlands. And then we will hear from James and Gabor. James Colley from the Independent Living Movement Ireland, and Gabor Petri from MEOS in Hungary. Maybe Gabor can explain the abbreviation. We will hear about the issues in their countries and their work on this area, in this area, and we will we will start with that. So without further ado, Tiandi is going to set the scene a little bit for us. Tiandi, please go ahead. Please just unmute yourself. Tiandi's assistant is helping.
Yes. Tiandi wrote it down, and she cannot speak. I will speak for her. And it's called Dignity, Discrimination and Accommodation. I am Tiandi Groof, and I live in my own apartment in Amsterdam with 24/7 support. My brother shares the apartment and keeps an eye on my personal assistants, as my body is totally dependent on them. I have just finished the Master European International Human Rights in Leiden with a thesis on Dutch legal protection of the right to education for children with disabilities. Writing this thesis challenged me to think about the relation between dignity, discrimination, and accommodation. Dignity is the right to be valued and respected. Every form of discrimination is an infliction of this dignity and a deprivation of the person because the discriminating people or community judges you not to be valuable enough to be a member of their community. The right to dignity without discrimination is the central principle in the human rights treaties. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability, the CRPD, elaborates on this principle of dignity and other principles in Article 3 of the treaty, which are respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of person. This is very important for the housing, of course. Non-discrimination, full and effective participation and inclusion in society, respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disability as part of the human diversity and humanity, equality of opportunity, accessibility, equality of men and women, respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities, and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve identities. The CRPD Treaty points out sharply that in order to show this respect and dignity for every community member and to avoid discrimination, the community and the persons belonging to it must accommodate the needs of the fellows to the amount that they can participate on an equal foot with everyone. It is natural for a parent or friend to console a crying baby or crying friend. This is accommodation. It is accepted that the government builds dikes to provide safety against high waters. This is accommodation. For wheelchair users, it means building ramps and widen up doors. When you don't get this accommodation, the government gives a message to the community and you that you are not valued enough to live in their community. Not providing this accommodation is discrimination, according to the definition of the CRPD in Article 2. This is the difference with discrimination on the grounds of race, although statistics show that there is indirect racial discrimination in access to regular schools. Abolishing discrimination on the ground of race requires a change in attitude. Abolishing discrimination on the grounds of disability requires more. It requires not only a change in attitude, but also requires a change in systems and spending money and energy on accommodating the diverse needs of persons with disabilities in order to function on an equal foot with everyone. For independent living, it means that the state must provide accessible houses and support to live in it independently, as stated in the CRPD Article 3. Not only the house must be accessible for the whole society, but also the transport system, schools and public buildings, communications and politics. In the Netherlands, there are laws to protect you against discrimination, but the obligation to provide accommodation is less understood in the Netherlands. All kinds of reasons are put forward for providing accommodation. When a school decides that the role of accommodating the child with a disability surpasses the benefit for the school and subsequently refuses to admit the child, the school is protected by Dutch laws. If accommodating public transport costs too much money, Dutch law accepts this argument for denial of accommodation. The important question is, of course, is it ethical to present dilemmas for service providers like schools or housing corporations to decide which option should prevail? The right to independent living with the cost of accommodation on one side, or the avoiding of the cost of accommodation by denying accommodation, and thus exclude the person from the community? My answer is no. Where dignity and discrimination are involved, there should be no choice. Human rights should be paramount and established in laws. Fulfilling the rights of disabled is the litmus test of civilization, because it requires not only respect but also efforts and sometimes money to let them function on equal foot with others. Countries have signed and ratified the CPD. Now they must act on it and provide this accommodation in order to give persons with disabilities the enjoyment of the right to dignity. Good experience. This past week I visited my old school in Pareto Terme, Italy. Only 2 janitors were the same as 20 years earlier. All the other staff and teachers work elsewhere or are with pension. Nevertheless, I was welcomed as an old friend, although I couldn't express myself, overwhelmed as I was by emotions. I felt dignified by them, and this emotion means a lot to me. It makes me feel human and valuable. This is the message what I want to bring the world. Giving dignity to a person does not cost money and brings love for you and everyone. What can we do? For each of us, it is in our power to give dignity to a person by welcoming her or him, independent how she looks, behaves, her abilities or opinions. Giving this dignity to each other creates love and solidarity, needed to change laws in society. Every politician or legislator has the experience of once being rejected in a love affair or soliciting for a job. He or she will know the hurt feelings. Memorizing these feelings will help them to understand the importance of dignity, to live with dignity in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiandi, and thank you for Tiandi's assistant for supporting. There was a little bit of an echo, but I hope everybody was able to hear Tiandi well. I'm not sure, there is a question how to reduce it. I'm not sure how, but I hope everybody was able to hear Tiandi well and clear. Thank you for sharing this. And Tiandi was speaking about the concept of dignity, which is so important. And obviously, it's really important to recognize that every single person has a right to live in dignity. Through having access to housing, but also through access to personal assistance and all the other supports in the community. Tiandi, please feel free to come in later, or you may ask questions for Tiandi later. I will bring in Gabor now, who will talk about supported housing in Hungary. Let me just spotlight Gabor. There we go. Hungary, I think, is the only country where the CRPD committee actually expanded to quite a lot of degree on access to housing and on this service of supported housing in Hungary. And that was in the inquiry report under the optional protocol on Hungary. So it's really good to have Gabor here and to hear a little bit about how it works and doesn't work. There you go, Gabor.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Gabor Petre, and I work at the National Federation of Organizations of Persons with a Physical Disability. That's the abbreviation NEOS stands for, this very long name. Well, I only have 10 minutes to cover a lot of topics. So actually, I'm not even sure I can achieve that, but let me share my screen with you. I brought a couple of examples. It's basically just the data, statistical data showing you the context, the social policy context of supported housing in Hungary. We can say supported housing, or we can also call it supported living, depending on how you translate it from the Hungarian into the English language. But the main point here is that when you hear this term, supported housing or supported living, and you think about the Hungarian example, please do not think that it's the same as it is in English. The name is the same, the content, the service content is rather different. I will tell you why. Supported housing is just one type of social services in Hungary, just like it is in many other countries. It's part of a broader pool of social services available to disabled people. But to understand where supported housing is placed within the social policy system, I think we need to look at a couple of statistics, I guess, that will explain why it is so sidelined or marginalized, and even on the margin why it remains the way it is now. So the first slide is about the number of places in long-term residential care institutions in the country. Why I picked this one was that it just shows you that the number of beds or places in residential institutions for disabled people remains largely the same over the span of nearly 20 years. At 20 years, that's a long time, and we have spent millions of euros and countless hours of advocacy, webinars, lobbying governments, etc. And what the statistics tell us is there are some changes, but those are very slight changes. What you see on the slide is 5 bars that show you the number of beds in residential institutions between 2000 and 2018. In the first bar, it's nearly 16,000 places in social care institutions. And on the last bar, 18 years later, it's nearly the same. What changed is that there's a slight decrease in the number of places in residential institutions, and there is a growing number of places in group homes. Group homes under Hungarian legislation include arrangements for up to 12 or even 14 people. The most typical is the size for 12 for financial reasons. The second slide is about different types of social services available for disabled people. And this chart shows you the number of disabled people drawing on social care services. Why I picked this one? Because these bars show you how many people get those types of social services. But the point to be taken from this slide is really the small number of people reaching these services. So if you think about the previous slide, you saw something around 18,000 people who live in institutions or in group homes. Here we see lower numbers of people in 2018 drawing on social care services. The most popular service remains support service that is only available on weekdays and between given hours when those services are open, most typically between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. With very, very few exceptions, none of these services are available during weekends or at night. And the last one, the last slide I brought you is the one that is about supported housing, the topic of today. And this just shows how that very few people are getting this service even today. The latest data is from 2019. Apologies for this. I didn't have time to search for the latest statistics if they are even available. But yes, this is a new type of service. Yes, supported housing was introduced in the social care system by the Hungarian government after disabled people's organizations and human rights organizations lobbied the government. So yes, you may even call this as a success, because there's a new item among the social care services called supported housing that people can reach. However, it still remains fairly insignificant in the whole of social services. Only slightly more than 1,000 people reached or got this type of service in 2019, and the increase in the 6 years since it was first available in 2014 is not so convincing in terms of transformative progressive reforms in the Hungarian social care system. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and just a couple of points, because these were the numbers and the broader context of social policy in Hungary. But as Ines mentioned already, Hungary is one of those very few countries that were subject to a UN inquiry under the optional protocol of the CRPD, which was a great thing, even though we can't really feel the actual impact on the ground of the report, but it was very good that it still happened because it told us many things that we already tried to tell the government. If you're interested in this inquiry report, I urge you to try and find it on the UN's website. It tells a tale of a lot of efforts put into transformative reforms in the Hungarian system, and it also tells the tale of a lot of failures that are facing today. So what does this UN report tell us about supported houses in Hungary? The first thing that the UN explored was that these services are still largely under the control of former institution leaders. So the institutions are actually responsible for running these services. They control and they manage the services, and residents of these services are not really in control of how the service is developed or delivered. Of course, there are probably good practices as well, but one problem I should really underline this. One problem that we have here in this country is that we do not have the data monitoring of these services and getting data about these services, speaking to residents, asking them how they feel, is very, very limited. The government just doesn't like, and service providers don't like, human rights defenders, you know, barging in the services and looking around, taking photos and asking residents how they feel. So there are a lot of things we don't know, and I'm fairly convinced that there are also a lot of good things that we don't know. So if we had access to these services, we would probably be seeing a much more nuanced picture of supported housing. But we don't. So I can only tell you what we know from the UN report and what we know from anecdotes or people we know. Another thing that was underlined in the UN report was that that the everyday running of these houses are not in the control of residents, but what often happens is also that surveillance is in place. So people are watched, and even where people can leave the house and return, they may not have the options to negotiate the terms of this or to keep contact with the families or communities, even the local community where they are. Another critique that was voiced by many DPOs, Disabled People's Organization in this country, was the location of these houses. These houses were built, funded by the European Union structure funds that I have not mentioned yet, but it's very important, that these new services are often built on the outskirts of settlements. These are, you should imagine, small villages or small towns where they bought a piece of land somewhere in the outskirts of the settlement, and this is where they built new houses by EU structural funds, and this is where you find these supported housing arrangements. Well, if you live in the outskirts of a village or a town, you have very limited access to local community. Another problem is that many of these supported housing arrangements are found, or buildings are found in areas where there is very limited access to community services as well. You know, small villages in Eastern Europe, and I guess in large parts of Western Europe and Southern Europe as well, struggle to get public services that they used to get. I'm thinking about general practitioners, doctors, government offices, cultural centers, cinemas, wherever people want to go and enjoy themselves, or just you know, to do things that other people living in cities like to do. And of course, this is a very tricky situation, because if you live with 12 other people or 15 other people, as they usually do in these supported housing arrangements in Hungary, you may still want to keep contact with the local community and participate in, you know, in mainstream life. I'm nearing the end of my time, but another issue I'd like to mention is the fact that most residents in these in these services are tied so much to, even today, as residents of supported housing, they are still connected so closely to the former institution they used to live in, that they still go back to the institution every day to participate in the sheltered workshop. They often get the meals from these institutions. And it's not only the director of the institution that oversees their facility, but it's also the staff. The staff often remains the same, which is obviously not ideal. And just finally, a very important point, as you may have already figured it out from my presentation, the number of places within one single supported housing arrangement is significantly bigger than in many West European countries. You know, if you visit some of those countries, the Netherlands, Ireland, or England, or other countries, you're very likely to find places with 3 or 4 residents, maybe a bit more, but this is, I think, the most typical, at least based on what I've seen there. Well, in this country, since this service type was opened as a possibility for service providers, the most popular choice was 15 or 12 or even 25. But I should also mention that this is just the type of supported housing that were created under the institutionalization program of the government. But there is also a smaller but slowly growing type of supported housing that is basically done for people living in a community. So some NGOs, local parents, organizations, DPOs around the country are starting to realize that they can viably open supported housing, which they do. And although statistics are limited, but we see some promising signs of this sector slowly getting off the ground, and more people moving into small, real supported housing arrangements for 2 or 3 or 4 people somewhere in the city or somewhere in a well-connected area, and not being managed by social services, so that the housing service and the social service are separate, as they should, because we believe they should. And really, just a footnote to the whole thing, one of the main problems is that during the whole debate in the last 5 or 6 years in Hungary, and the debate between the Hungarian government and the European Commission and international NGOs, one topic that is often get forgotten is personal assistance. You know, the type of social service that service users can control themselves. This is not even on the table. We were told by government officers recently that they have some proposals to the European Commission that in the present programming period between 2021 and 2027, by using EU structural funds, they will try to introduce some form of, what they are thinking about introducing personal assistance. But of course, these promises remain quite vague. That's all I wanted to say, and I'm sorry for going over time.
Thanks so much, Gabor. You didn't go much over time, so thank you for that. And thanks for sharing the experience from Hungary. I will pass on to James from the Independent Living Movement Ireland, just very quickly to say that the captions are now available for anyone who needs them. Sorry, we couldn't have them from the beginning. And James, please go ahead, over to you. Let me just, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Thank you very much. I suppose thanks to Enis and to Peadar for the invite today as well. Delighted to be here, zooming in from Ireland. And I suppose what struck me before I start is listening to Tandy and Gower talking about, I suppose, the dignity and the access to services and the location of housing. And I think the intersection of all of those and how that impacts on disabled people's choices and our lives. So I think it's really important, and it's something I hope to bring from our presentation here today as well. But I suppose my name is James Cawley. I'm the Policy Officer with Independent Living Movement Ireland. We are a campaigning national disabled persons organisation or DPO, led by and for disabled people. We promote the philosophy of independent living and seek to build an inclusive society. Central to the way we work is to ensure that policy decisions that impact on the lives of disabled people have to be directly influenced by those whose lives are directly affected. And in this case, we are talking about disabled people. Our philosophy can be summed up as nothing about it without us, and rights not charity. So basically what we're saying here is to talk to, consult with, and engage with disabled people, and so it can allow for a more authentic voice in all policy areas. And just to say, while I am presenting a presentation today, I should have said I will verbalise everything that is on the slides. So on the next slide, it says mission. ILMI's mission is to collectively work to create an independent living movement in Ireland, which is led by and for disabled people. We promote a rights-based social model of disability, and we challenge the medical charity model of disability. So we would say it's the policies, it's the structures, it's the systems that disable us. And hence, because we, from a rights-based social model of disability, you might notice that the language throughout this presentation is disabled people or disabled persons. So we are working towards the removal of societal barriers that prevent active equal participation of disabled people, and we challenge the denial of people's rights and the promotion of the philosophy of independent living. Our vision in Independent Living Movement Ireland is an Ireland where disabled persons have freedom, choice and control over all aspects of their lives, and that we can fully participate in an inclusive society as equals. Independent living is the right of all persons, regardless of age or impairment, to live in the community, to have the same responsibilities and range of choices as everyone else has in housing, in transportation, and education, to participate in social, economic and political life in their own communities. So I often say it's about linking up those pieces of the independent living jigsaw, so housing, transport, employment and personal assistance services. And our previous speaker talked about that around, the accessing of services and how that can link to housing for disabled people to have choice and control. And of course, I think the key thing there is Article 19, the UN CRPD, that links all of those and the housing pieces and the support pieces to allow disabled people to have choice and control over their lives. I suppose in an Irish context, then I just want to briefly talk a policy context. The National Housing Strategy for Persons with a Disability 2011 was the government strategy to specifically address the housing needs of disabled people over the period of 2011 to 2016. And this National Housing Strategy for People with Disability was extended then to 2020, and it actually comes to an end this year. Then a new national strategy is now being developed, the National Housing Strategy for Disabled People. And this strategy is about facilitating the provision of housing options and related services to disabled people to allow individual choice and support independent living. So I suppose what we're saying here is there is an acknowledgement that housing is not just the four walls, that there is a realization that for many disabled people, we need supports to live independently, whether that's personal assistance, whether that's in-home supports, assistive technology, etc. With this National Housing Strategy for Disabled People, at a local level, Ireland has 31 local authorities. And within those local authorities, there is a local decision-making structure called a Housing and Disability Steering Group. And the acronym is HDSGs. And they're established in all these local areas, as I say. These local decision-making structures are in relation to housing policy. But when we conducted research about 3 years ago in Independent Living Movement Ireland, it was quite unclear if there was disabled people on these local housing structures. There was maybe service providers representing disabled people, but what we wanted to see was the DPO voice there, the Disabled Persons Organisation voice, or the disabled person, the lived experience. So ILMI, as part of many national policy spaces, has been calling on the Department of Housing and local structures to have people with lived experience on the housing disability steering groups. And ILMI has been very welcoming of the call for lived experience onto the housing disability steering groups as part of this new strategy, which we hope will be launched actually early December of this year to kick into action for 2022. I suppose that's the policy context, but just to kind of indicate some of the issues as well that disabled people face in Ireland in relation to housing. Unfortunately, Ireland does not have a central, uniform, accessible application process. So we are calling that we should establish and resource a central, uniform, accessible application process for housing and independent living supports, where these two areas, housing and independent living supports, communicate together, because currently they don't. And that's where disabled people find themselves caught in a catch-22 situation. So, for example, in some cases you might get offered the house, but then you don't have the support package. So people find themselves caught in these two bureaucratic systems that don't seem to communicate. So ourselves and Independent Living Movement Ireland and another national organisation in Ireland called Inclusion Ireland have done a report called Our Housing Rights, and I'd be happy to send that on as well to our colleagues in ENIL. But it does talk as well about one of the issues that we've identified is that there needs to be more interagency cooperation between all statutory bodies to work together to put systems in place that ensure homes and supports are offered to disabled people at the same time. This will ensure disabled people's rights are upheld as per Article 19 of the UNCRPD. And we know that Article 19 talks about disabled people having the right to choose where they live, to live with who they want, and with a range of in-home supports. Also, there are a few really accessible homes for disabled people in Ireland, and this is in part due to inadequate and weak regulations such as Part M of our building regulations in Ireland and a lack of enforcement. So the Part M regulations in Ireland means that the homes that we currently have might be wheelchair visitable, but they're not wheelchair livable for those who are wheelchair users, say, for example, in terms of living in the actual house. So it goes back to the previous speaker as well, talking around the location. So housing is much more than just the four walls. It's about us being able to live in the home, be able to access it in our communities, and of course the supports as well. So ILMI, along with Inclusion Ireland, are calling on, I suppose, a minimum of 7.5 of all new social housing and housing provided to be a minimum of that to be provided is 7.5%. Just a few statistics again. There are 8,300 disabled people in residential settings. There are just over 4,000 disabled people living in inappropriate institutional settings. And this includes disabled people under the age 65 living in nursing homes and people living in congregated settings. And in Ireland, we do have a national policy that is trying to work towards getting disabled people out of congregated settings. But I suppose trying to align our national policies with the UNCRPD to allow that to continue to happen. Many disabled people that we identified in our report as well are living in the family home with aging parents who are carers for those people because there's lack of assistance and support for choice and control for those people, and without supports to live independently. There is a housing crisis in Ireland for non-disabled people, but also disabled people fall victim to this as well, because there has there's always been that housing crisis, and in terms of accessible housing, it's extremely difficult for disabled people. Independent living support, such as personal assistance, referred to here on the slide as PAS as well. They are under-resourced, and we know from the years of 2008 and 2018, there has been no increase in personal assistance services despite the increased demand. But also, it's really important to note, in Ireland, there's still currently no legal right to a personal assistance service in Ireland. And ILMI has been campaigning and lobbying the government to ensure a right to personal assistance service in Ireland. So we did have a kind of a government motion, a unanimous Dáil motion passing in November 2019. And we're hoping to follow that up with all the local authorities passing a motion as well, where the national will meet the local will meet the national in the country, and to try and push for a right to a personal assistance service as per Article 19 of the UNCRPD. As we all know as well, an accessible home is so much more than physical access. It includes the location, accessible transport links, in-home support, assistive technology, and much more. So it's about that linking up of that independent living jigsaw. And we need to start thinking about building more genuine, inclusive communities and not just the four walls, i.e. a house. There are virtually no affordable homes that disabled people can afford, given excessive poverty rates and the low employment rates, for example, in some cases for disabled people, but also the cost of living for disabled people in Ireland. So we need to ensure that disabled people are given the opportunities to access education and employment to dismantle the many systemic barriers we face as disabled people. I'm going to finish off then, because I know there is a question and answers as well, and time is short as well. Just two projects that ILMI have been supporting to get disabled people to participate in decision-making structures. The first one is Making Inclusion a Reality. And this is a project that ILMI has been working on with one of the local authorities, South Dublin County Council. And it's about facilitating disabled people to inform the development of housing policy through the housing disability steering groups, the groups that I've talked about. The network is made up of disabled people from this local authority, and it's supported by us as a national disabled persons organisation. It is about promoting the real and effective participation of disabled people across all impairments in county and local representative structures. The project is also about establishing models of best practice for public bodies in how to engage with disabled people in the design, delivery, implementation, and monitoring of policies that impact on their lives, including the public sector duty that is a duty that says that we should promote equality and prohibit discrimination within Ireland as well. So this could be a model that could be replicated along other local decision-making structures. And just to note, this will be launched next week on the 1st of December, so next Wednesday. And finally then, ILMI also, because housing is one of our pillars, we have developed an ILMI housing network. So in consultation with our members, it was identified that there was a need for a training program and a need to support, or for our support even, to be put in place to build people's capacities when representing a movement or ILMI on these local decision-making structures known as the Housing Disability Steering Groups. The ILMI Housing Network was designed to assist disabled people to become active and effective members of their housing disability steering groups. Some of the topics that we covered were having our voices heard and looking at representation. What does that mean? What does participation mean? What does building a network mean? Building allies with our political representatives, with different stakeholders, etc. We had an input from a human rights activist around a home, not an institution, rights, not charity. So moving away from this idea of disabled people not having choice. We should have choice under Article 19 of the UNCRPD. We also looked at universal design and designing even for diversity. And we looked at also conflict triggers and how we can work collectively to eradicate barriers for disabled people. And just to say as well, here's some of the current work that ILMI has been working on, and I can send this on as well to ENIL to send out to those who have logged into this webinar today. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Ines and to Peadar for having me, and I'm happy to send on the PowerPoint. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thanks to you, James. So this was really great to hear about all the work that you're doing. I think ILMI, or ILMI, as you say, is probably one of our most active members when it comes to housing, and I think it's a really good example for the rest of us, and hopefully for other DPOs on how to build the capacity of disabled people to engage in these discussions and decisions around housing. So yes, we'd be happy to share your presentation with everyone in case people would like to look a bit more closely. James went a little bit more over time, but I think it was really interesting and important to hear this. So without further ado, I will pass to the floor to Andor Urmos. Andor used to work at the European Commission, but where he was in charge of the policy behind infrastructure investments. So we thought it'd be good for him to share a little bit of information about some of the funding opportunities. Andor, please go ahead. I will spotlight you now.
Hello, hello. Good afternoon.
Hi, we can see you.
And do you hear me as well?
Yes, and we can hear you.
Oh, that's perfect. Perfect, perfect. Do you see my presentation as well?
Yes, we can see. So
Perfect.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ines, for inviting me, and thank you very much for the introduction. I hope I will not mess up with the computer because I'm not very good actually with these technical things, but let's see how it will go. So as you said, I used to work for the European Commission, so I'm trying to help you actually to understand, let's say, the EU funds opportunities, especially for housing when it comes to ensuring independent living. And this short presentation, I just would like to show you some of the examples, maybe that would help to understand that what really the EU funds are doing, let's say, or have been doing actually in the recent years. And I will come back to some abstract, very boring stuff as well, but just what's happening, let's say, from a legislative point of view with the EU funds. But probably for the colleagues would be important to understand that there are some very important safeguards in the regulations which would ensure independent living and good social housing investments. Just the reality shows a little bit different picture, as sometimes it's simply not happening. Let me start actually with some pictures, okay? And Ines, you may remember that actually we always use these pictures in our presentations. As, let's say, these pictures are showing the baseline, like what we are facing, or that we have been facing actually in member states, like for example in Romania, what you see in the picture, regarding institutions for people with disabilities, and let's say what happened in the scope of the EU funds. This is a very particular case in Tantava, where actually the EU funds have been used to refurbish this institution. It was a very cosmetic, I would say, change or modifications of this institution, but unfortunately the treatment of people has not changed. So there were lots of abuse, torture, and this was a very well-known case actually in the international media as well. It was a very clear example that EU funds have been used, but they really did not provide, let's say, conditions for independent living. And this picture is also very well known from the 90s, actually, where we have started this whole discussion about the DI, about the childcare institutions in Romania. The picture sometimes is a bit better when we see the 14-20 so-called programming period, because there are some, let's say, good examples, which I really don't like to say, but okay, these are some there are some examples where we have some, let's say, assurance or hope for the future that funds can be used much more, let's say, progressively than in some other cases. These examples are coming from Croatia and Slovenia, and also from Slovakia, where actually home care services have been built, especially with the infrastructure developments, which is really very, how to say, promising, because the infrastructure development is one of the most important, most critical question when it comes to the EU funds discussions. I will not go to the details. I will share with you the slides so you can read, let's say, the details. But obviously, the other angle of this question, also in the 14-20 period, is Romania, where we have seen that the big institutions have been, let's say, downsized, and Romania built a lot of so-called small group homes with the EU funds. And this, unfortunately, the small group homes, building the small group homes, unfortunately, is still going on with some progress, with some success, and with some less, let's say, significant success, because even the money is not used in Romania, which is, so Romania is the country where even actually building group homes is not going well. So at least in other countries, they are building the group homes with a high speed, but in Romania, that's also stopped. So it's a very critical situation, actually, that big institutions are downsized, and we have across Eastern Europe, everywhere, small residential institutions for 12, 14, 15 people. But unfortunately, institutional care has not changed. So it means that the treatment is still very bad. And we need to understand why, let's say, the independent living conditions are not supported better, actually, with the EU funds. And these cases are from Poland, where we have seen some innovative, let's say, solutions, innovative angles of using EU funds. Just to give you an example, like this is a very old school institution in Poland, and with the use of EU funds, they remodeled it, and now this is includes 4 little institutions. Every floor is basically a separate entity and a separate small institution. When it comes to the EU funds, I have to tell you some very abstract but probably important features, and it might help us actually to understand better what the EU funds can do. One important question is what member states are not necessarily always doing is to find the priorities and to understand that where are the priorities are lying. So as a general message, EU funds will never solve the deinstitutionalization problem in the country, will never be enough to reform the whole social and healthcare system. At the same time, it's enough, EU funds should be enough to launch the reform and to make some models how the reform should go on, and let's say the implications of the EU funds should be understood as how the national funds can follow the EU funds programs. The other important problem here, which we have seen all over, let's say, Eastern and Central European countries, is that ERDF investments, so the infrastructure investments, are not necessarily followed with human capacity development, which is really very bad. So member states are very much focusing on bricks and, I don't know, walls, kitchens, but the training of people, or let's say remodeling the whole care, is not really part of the programs. Unfortunately, this is the case in many countries. We have to work much better actually on this. As you may know, in the 14-20 period and even now in the 21-27, the Commission introduced so-called preconditions. It's what we call now enabling conditions, and based on these enabling conditions, member states, they have to prepare different strategies. Let me come back to this question. And one more important question is the result orientation. It sounds very abstract, but let me just tell you that member states are requested to provide results in line with the current legal and policy frameworks. So in a very simple way, because of the UNCRPD, member states, they have to provide independent living conditions. They have to show the results of independent living conditions. This is not the case. So that's why even member states are not following, let's say, this very basic issue about the result orientation. This is really not good. And also, actually, member states, they received several country-specific recommendations and so-called Annex D. This is part of the country reports, where actually the transition from institutional to community-based services have been very much highlighted, but again, not so much success. This is an important graph just to show you that 24 billion euros have been allocated in the 14-20 period by member states to so-called social health education infrastructure. This is more infrastructure development money. So this is the money which was available for member states to build social housing, to build day centers, build equipment, and whatever. So in a very simple way, we can say that this money was quite significant. Let's look at Poland, for example, or even Hungary, Czech Republic. So there's a really significant amount of money. So we should have achieved much more results than what we see at this stage. Important to understand that this kind of integrated approach or integrated use of funds is absolutely a basic requirement for member states in the 21-27 period. You see on the slide that in the 21-27 period, all of these regulations are put in one package. So it means that the ERDF, the infrastructure money, and the social fund, which is about the human capital money, this should be much closer and should work much better than before, together, of course, with all the other funds, like, for example, the asylum migration fund and so on. That's, again, let me repeat the message here. If you are separating the infrastructure and the human capital development, you will never achieve good results in DI. These are the enabling conditions. And I think colleagues who are sitting in this workshop, they know very well, but if not, then I mean, I'm happy to respond to any questions. What is important here that member states are requested to prepare strategy on poverty reduction, on health, and in both cases, the regulation is asking very specific actions to make the shift from institutional to community-based services. Let's see how these strategies are, let's say, being prepared. So it's an ongoing procedure, but let's see how it will result actually in some good investments. And very, very important that there are two horizontal enabling conditions. One is about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. The other one is the UNCRPD, which should be applied across all policy areas. So it's important to understand that, for example, the rights of persons with disabilities should be respected not only in social inclusion, but also in transport, in energy efficiency, everywhere, across all policy areas of the structural funds. And in a very practical terms, what the ERDF, so the infrastructure development money, can do, and because I'm just would like to highlight it because this is again the most critical one. Unfortunately, when it comes to the volume of funds, it's in the 14-20 period, member states have allocated only 1.4 billion euros actually for social housing or for housing, which is really very low volume of money compared to the needs. Needs are much bigger. But even as I mentioned earlier, even this let's say budget was not used properly. So again, when it comes to the accommodations and we are building group homes, or when it comes to the segregation of people, like building group homes actually at the edge of the villages or cities, this is something what we need to follow much closer. And that's why there was a guidance in 2016 about the so-called desegregation, so how to desegregate the facilities, with a very close link to not supporting institutionalization and large residential institutions. And also it is a very direct link to the desegregation of marginalized communities in general, like Roma, migrants, homeless, and disabled people. So in very simple words, what the ERDF can do, the infrastructure development can do in DI, you see here the examples: individual social housing, apartments, day centers, equipments for assisted living, and so on, accessibility measures. These are the investments what should be expected actually from member states, and these are the investments which are very rarely happening, if I can summarize it in this way. So we need to push a little bit more and these investments, and to understand why, for example, the social housing element is so much not part of the structural funds programs. One problem is probably what I learned in the last years. One problem is that member states, they don't have social housing policies. So there is no particular focus on social housing in their policy frameworks. At the same time, there is also a kind of political hostile environment in some member states when it comes to the moving disabled people from the institution to individual social housing to provide independent living, because let's say the neighborhood, or let's say the whole community would not see it, would not like to see it actually that people with disabilities are living next door. That's happened actually in many Eastern European countries. Also, actually, children from childcare institutions were not very much welcome in some neighborhoods when some investments have been made. There are some important questions which I would like to highlight here as well, and maybe the colleagues, they can use it in their arguments. The Commission would like to push much more the ESF plus support, so the human capital development support first, and it should be followed by the ERDF, so by the infrastructure development. The point is here that we need good human capacity, good training of people, and the bricks should come only afterwards. In many cases, it's completely another way around. So the ERDF is coming first, and in some cases, even the ESF support is missing. We should request much better actually the consistency with the enabling conditions, in particular with the UNCRPD, and again, as I mentioned, the conditions for independent living, accessibility, and to prevent all forms of segregation. Development, which is a little bit social housing or even the DI. However, it's the local authorities, which we call it sustainable urban development. And as you see, 8% of the regional development fund budget should be allocated to sustainable urban development. So this is a precondition even. So local authorities are responsible for this implementation. And in the 14-20 period, it was quite significant amount of money, like 15 billion euros. We will see in the 21-27 how it will work. And in this very short graph, you will see that social housing, social inclusion in the focus of urban development was one of the most important priority. So local authorities, they see this problem, whatever it means. It could be, of course, a deprived neighborhood issue with the Roma communities. It could be DI, it could be migrants, it could be very different issues. But the important message here is that local authorities, they see this problem actually about the social inclusion in the scope of urban development. So we need to focus much better in the future, probably on this angle. Thank you very much for your attention. Ines, I have to leave, unfortunately, because I have to go to another meeting. Is it possible that you will send me questions if there's any from the participants?
Sure, Andor. Yeah, we can take questions for you if there are any. And thanks for joining, and thanks for this presentation, which helps us understand a little bit about the funding from opportunities from the EU. Of course, we know a lot of bad things were done in the past. So thank you, Andor. I will pass over to Pedar, who will take over from here. Pedar, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Yes, thank you for your presentations. So we are, if anybody has any questions, now you can leave them in the chat or the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand. So if you have any questions, if there are no questions, then we will we'll move on to the next speaker, but I'll just give it a few minutes just to see if anybody has questions.
I'm following the chat, Pedar. I will let you know if there's anybody, or if anybody raises their hand, I will let you know. I don't see anyone at the moment. So maybe we can go ahead and...
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll just wait. Yeah, okay, let's go ahead to our next speaker, who is Alice Bergoid. I think that's, yeah, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name properly, who is the policy assistant for the European Federation of National Organizations working with homeless people. So yeah, go ahead, Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, I will share my screen. Okay. Sorry, I'd like to... I think now it works. So yeah, hey, at FENSA, European Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, and I will talk more broadly about the housing initiatives at the EU level. Sorry, it doesn't work. Okay, so yeah, first I'm going to talk about the EU initiatives related to housing, and then I'm going to shortly present a bit of FENSA's work on housing. So first, for the EU initiative related to housing, you have the European Pillar of Social Rights. It was an initiative launched
Sorry, everyone. I don't know what happened.
No problem.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
I'm going to... Please go ahead, Alice. I don't know. It all just
no problem.
Yeah, Alice, yeah, go ahead. Your microphone is having difficulty, but I think...
I will make you host, Pedar. Maybe it's my computer.
Okay.
Okay, just to avoid... Please go ahead, Alice.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, I was saying, so the European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan was launched last March by the European Commission, and it gave more concrete measures for the implementation of these principles. It also attested that due to the severe housing crisis, the expectations from the Principle 19 and 20 did not have been met. Sorry, I struggle to pass to another slide. Okay. Then you have the platform on combating homelessness that was launched in June 2021, sorry. It was the first time that the European institution, government, and civil society decided to work together with the objective of ending homelessness by 2030 in the EU. So the objective of the platform is to facilitate the dialogue, mutual learning, monitoring, and the cooperation between the actors that fight homelessness. The more specific objectives, you can read them on the slides. Is that no one sleeps rough due to lack of emergency accommodation. No one lives in emergency accommodation longer than required. No one is discharged from an institution, for example, a hospital, without a solution after that. Eviction should be prevented, or you find a housing solution after that, and no one is discriminated due to the situation of being homeless. Now I'm going to present two other initiatives that are related to each other because they are the European Bauhaus Initiative and the Affordable Housing Initiative, that you can see here. They are both aimed to achieve the objectives of the Green New Deal, European Green Deal. It's a plan to transform the European Union and overcome the challenges of the climate crisis. So they are part of the same set of tools, which is the Renovation Wave for Europe. This set of tools aims to double Europe's renovation rate in the next 10 years and contribute to making the continent carbon neutral by 2050. So it sets out a few actions to be implemented to do so, and the European Bauhaus Initiative and Affordable Housing Initiative are part of them. They are really interesting initiatives because they really want to have innovative processes starting from the people, the needs of the people, their disabilities, etc., and designing affordable and appropriate houses according to that. So first, the new European Bauhaus. It's inspired from an architectural movement that was born in Germany in 1919. And I wanted to make accessible housing with good quality and aesthetics. So the new European Bauhaus, it's an initiative from the Commission to rethink the ways we live together in a sustainable, inclusive, but also beautiful way. So first, the sustainability is important because it aims at achieving the climate goals, circularity, zero pollution, etc. The second one is inclusion, of course, being affordable, prioritizing the people that need it the most. And third is aesthetics, going beyond functionality, improving the quality of experience. So for the timeline, it went from a global design with last summer a public consultation from the European Commission to collect ideas from the European people. And now it aims at doing a local implementation with pilot projects being launched last September. And the outcome of that will be the new European Bauhaus Lab. It will be a lab to create new tools, solutions, and policy recommendations to achieve these goals. And you have also the new European Bauhaus prizes that celebrates the best projects. For example, here you have the example of Spanish project that was awarded at the last prize. Now I'm talking about the Affordable Housing Initiative. It was the other initiative. The aim is to tackle the challenge of the decline in the stock and quality of dwellings, but also the increase in the need for accommodation and affordable accommodation. So it was launched in October 2020 to provide support to local industrials with the ambition to pilot 100 lighthouse renovation districts. So it's quality affordable homes, but also link projects like that with local actors, use innovative process as I was talking about, but also like circular modular building, social innovation, engage the residents in the renovation process, etc. But also tackle energy poverty, guaranteeing that social housing has access to the necessary technical capacity and in general ensure that the renovated units remain affordable to everyone. Now I'm quickly talking about some other initiatives like the short-term rentals initiative, also from the Commission. It's tackled the fact that the short rentals platforms such as Airbnb, they have an impact on rents and access to affordable housing in Europe. So the aim is to develop responsible and fair growth in these short-term rentals, also give solutions to the cities to implement regulations and give equal opportunities to the platform. The new Leipzig Charter also that was implemented in November 2020. It was a policy framework document for sustainable urban development strategies for cities in Europe. And they evoked the fact that affordable and sustainable housing, as well as social housing, was necessary. More generally, during the COVID crisis, you had really a light put on housing and affordable housing in Europe. In December 2020, for example, the European Parliament, made a report on access to affordable housing for all. And it saw that the COVID had deepened the housing crisis and that the emergency measures for homeless people, for example, must be maintained until finding new permanent solutions. They also said that the renovation wave, as I talked about, was an opportunity to improve housing. InvestEU, as you can see on the slide, is a program to help companies and support policies in response to the COVID crisis. And one of their priorities is the investment in social and affordable housing. More generally, the Commission is increasingly encouraging member states to invest in affordable and social housing. That's good news. And with FENSA, we did an analysis that you can also see here on the allocation of member states by member state of the EU money for the recovery in housing. And we saw that it was really promising, with a lot of member states really tackling this issue. So now I'm going to quickly present our work at FENSA. So yeah, you have the faces of my coworkers, some of them. We are the only European NGO focusing exclusively on the fight against homelessness. Our goal is to end homelessness in Europe. And yeah, we see the lack of affordable, secure housing as a defining element of homelessness. It's a pathway into and out of homelessness, and we consider the right to housing as one of the most basic human rights. So yeah, we work on a large range of housing issues. I will go quickly around that. So the first is the Housing Solution Platform that we created as an initiative to identify, debate, promote innovative solutions for affordable housing in Europe. It wants to contribute to addressing the housing crisis by connecting people, ideas, tools, and the practices to generate housing solutions. Some of the topics we're working on at the moment, we published this, you can see on the slide, 50 out-of-the-box housing solutions. It was a publication presenting 50 projects that were examples to innovative, to tackle homelessness and housing exclusion in an innovative way. We also work a lot on the renovation wave. We do advocacy work to get housing recognized as one of the priorities in the context of climate justice. You have another initiative, it's Housing Rights Watch. It's a European network of associations, lawyers, academics. They're all committed to promote the right to housing in Europe. The goal of this initiative is to facilitate exchange and mutual learning among housing rights, experts, advocates. And how do we do that? We share information, first on legislative and judiciary initiatives. We support judicial proceedings at local, international, and European level. We monitor the denial of rights. We monitor the development of the housing situation from a rights-based perspective. And we support the changes in public policies. We do also events, training. I put an example on the slide. And the main thing we're working on at the moment is rent control, unfit housing, housing discrimination, etc. Lastly, we have the Housing First Hub, again at FENSA. It's a platform that wish to further develop and promote Housing First in Europe. So Housing First, quickly for those who don't know, it's a method to offer a permanent housing and supportive service to the homeless as quickly as possible. So this venture is wish to share learning and scale up housing first in Europe. And they do, as you can see, research, like a feasibility studies, for example, advocacy. They have also a community of practices. It's social workers implementing housing first projects that share experiences, problems, advices together. You have also a training aspect. It's social workers willing to learn and start implementing housing first projects that come and they learn about it. And lastly, you have the housing first for youth, is how to implement housing first specifically designed for young people. We do also a lot of research on housing. You can find many reports on our website. I put some examples here. And yeah, I put some useful links here. If you want to have access to my slides, I can share. We'll have direct access to what I'm talking about. And yeah, don't hesitate if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Alice. That was very insightful. Thank you very much. So thank you to all our participants. We are going to do a Q&A now. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat or Q&A function. But while I'm waiting, I'm going to ask some questions just to get us started. So actually, my first question is to Alice. So I just wanted to wonder if you could, I was wondering, could you elaborate on the European Bauhaus? Because I had been reading a bit about it earlier in the year, and it seems like an intriguing idea, to be honest, but it seems very insubstantial at the minute. Like, have you heard anything from anyone close to the Commission or anything about whether there's going to be substantial policy documents related to it, or is it going to be tied to European funds such as the European Social Fund, and is it going to be encouraged that member states can maybe only access the funds, maybe if they agree to, say, build houses in line with the Bauhaus initiative? Because at the minute it seems more like kind of a vague goal that the EU wants to work towards, but it doesn't seem like it has any kind of substantial legal grounding. So I was wondering if you heard anything about that from a Fensta point of view.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's really, really interesting. We already had this, talked about this question actually in a webinar we had last week about the new European Bauhaus with some people from the Commission, architects that were awarded the new European Bauhaus prize. So we had both point of view, and yeah, it was blurry for a lot of people, not really clear what it was going to be concretely. But I think now we just go out of the listening phase. They were just gathering some ideas from the people. And so they translated this idea in a policy document, which will be a Commission communication to start going more in implementation on the ground. You have also a funding that is available for the 2021-2022 projects is 85 million euro that is available for funding. But I really realized the concreteness of this when we had this event with the architects that presented their projects, and we really saw a really creative, inspiring, people with creating new ways of doing affordable housing. For example, we had this example of Agel's home in Bristol that created the housing on the top of other buildings. And they were not awarded by the prize, but like some of the projects, the one I show, for example, is using containers and put them together and create housing. So there is some concrete aspect to it. They have been awarded, and I think in the future it's going to invite more people to collaborate and do this kind of projects, and maybe some funding will appear more. But yeah, definitely it's not that clear for the moment, to be honest, but I think there is some practical aspect.
Okay, thank you, Alice. That was great. Thank you. I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on Bauhaus and see how it develops. Hopefully it will actually turn into something. So my next question is for you, Gabor. Sorry. I was wondering, is there any plans in Hungary to reform supported housing in line with the CRPD's committee's criticisms? of it more, which were essentially that it was mainly basically another form of institutionalization with another name. So to make it more independent living, actually, so that disabled people can actually live exactly where they want. They don't have to live in they don't have to live in like homes of like 12 to 15 people. And they have like access to personal assistance and stuff. So yeah, is there any plans from in a Hungarian context to reform what is happening at the supported housing stage?
Well, I assume there are plans, but those plans are well kept secrets from us because the government is not yet out with their plans. We know about plans submitted to the European Commission. We had some government officials presenting their plans back in May, and even just over a week ago at a webinar when someone came from the Ministry of Social Affairs, but those presentations remain really vague. So we do not know whether the new programming period under EU structural funds will include a significant amount of money going into this direction, for example, to allow NGOs or DPOs or anyone to open supported living places, services outside the remit of institutions, because this is where the biggest chunk of existing services are currently within, around institutions, managed by institutions, but this is not the only option. So we do not know about official government plans, but several organizations, including ours, told the government that they should support those who want to open such facilities, not for 12 people, for 3 or 4 people outside in the community. And there are already a couple of good examples where local NGOs or even municipalities decide to open supported housing for 3 or 4 people under one roof. So it's not the sort of big facility. If there are some plans in the legislation to put things right, I'm not sure about that at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Gabor. That's very interesting. I guess we'll have to see what happens in Hungary at the and just keep an eye on it. James, so I was going to build on something you said earlier, but actually I'm going to ask everyone this question in turn, but I think it would be good to start with James. You mentioned in your presentation that Ireland has a housing crisis. Unfortunately, I know that too well, being Irish too, in general. So so in a way you could say that this is one thing that, at least in theory, should make the wider public sympathetic to the needs of disabled people. I mean, obviously it's more intense, the housing crisis for disabled people, but it does give us some kind of common ground. So I was wondering, building on that, do you think that's a good way to advocate for there reform, and especially accessible housing reform, to link it to the argument that, well, there are disabling barriers for the general public when it comes to owning houses, because so do you think maybe linking the two together would be more effective, and it might make people slightly more aware of some of the issues that we are facing? And I guess if others want to answer that question after, in their context, about how are they in any way linking their efforts with anything that linking their efforts with anything the general, anything the public, any links to anything outside of that the general public might connect it with with their own difficulties to raise the barrier. So so James, if you want to go ahead first.
Yeah, absolutely, Father. I think it's a great question, and I think it goes back to that point around universal design and designing for diversity, that if we do design for diversity, it means everyone can access housing, can access services, etc. So I think, you know, we need to look at how we can design houses that are accessible, but as we say, it's not just about building the four walls, it's about building genuine, inclusive communities, it's about linking to transport, it's about linking to villages, to the community, as we say. And I think this actually draws a really interesting parallel. And I know one of my peers talks about this a good bit on social media, as has talked about this a good bit as well, is the pandemic has really drawn interesting parallels for disabled people and non-disabled people, in the sense that in Ireland we had, as you know, Badr, we've had where non-vaccinated people versus vaccinated people were able to access restaurants, etc., or indoor premises. And this is something that for disabled people in general, in relation to accessibility, that we have for years and still experience issues and barriers to get into restaurants, to pubs, to cultural venues. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted that that issue for not just disabled people, but non-disabled people who had to actually think about, okay, I actually can't go into that restaurant now if I'm a non-vaccinated person, or if my friend is, etc. So I think that created a really good kind of an example of the barriers that disabled people face every day. So I do think that by keeping this agenda for disabled people and non-disabled people, I think it's really important, because let's face it, anybody can become a disabled person. As we all know, impairments can be acquired through accident or illness. Impairments are invisible also as visible. So it's about designing for diversity. And I think in Ireland, in Irish context, I think it's going to be really exciting to see how the National Housing Strategy for Disabled People, which is due to be launched this year and kick into action in 2022, to see how that will align then with the housing market around accessible housing for all. So I hope that's answered some part of your question, Badr. Thanks for the question. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you, James, for that. Tandy, do you want to go next with your advocacy work? How do you try to connect it at all with the I don't know what the housing situation for the general public is like in the Netherlands, to be honest. I've no idea, but if there are any housing difficulties that the general public kind of experience, do you try to connect it anyway to build some kind of level of empathy between what you're trying to achieve and the struggles they might have, so that maybe they can start to connect the dots in their own mind about what is happening in a broader context?
Yes, I am mostly involved in inclusive education, because if children don't get to know what inclusion is, they will never be prepared to become good legislators or good politicians. And there is a social housing crisis now in the big cities. And for disabled people, well, I have personal assistance, personal budget. So for me, it's not too bad. And I have already a house, but it's for other people who now want to come and live independently, that's very difficult. But I think the best way is to involve children in inclusion. I think that's the best way. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tandy. Yeah, I agree. I think educating at a young age is definitely good. It will hopefully get a new generation of people to start thinking about these issues. So, Alice, so with FEMSTA, I mean, since the aim is to eradicate homelessness in Europe, do you do any work around trying to connect the dots with the general problem of homelessness and housing problems that the general public around Europe might experience, and disabled people, to try and build kind of awareness and alliances maybe within those spaces?
Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat the question? Like how we work, like doing advocacy, for example, and
yeah. So how would you do you in your work with FEDSTA trying to end homelessness? Do you like draw connections between, say, problems that the general public might have when it comes to housing, like affordable housing, for instance, which might and disabled people might have, so that because you could argue it's a form of disabling barriers for the general public that they can't afford a house, regardless of whether they're disabled or not. So do you draw any connections between them in your work to try and show that they that we aren't as different as some of us as we think, really?
Yeah, okay, sure. Sorry, I understand. Yeah, sure. I mean, at FENSA, we understand the word homeless as a really broad definition. We try to tackle energy poverty, the discrimination to access housing, the difficulty to access housing, poor housing conditions. Also, we consider that a housing that is not secure or that doesn't have access to energy enough is considered as housing exclusion. And yeah, definitely we work in collaboration with, for example, Fondation Abbé Pierre, Housing Europe, different organizations that also consider housing exclusion from a really broad definition. And more specifically, for our work to end homelessness, we do really different kind of activities. We are in dialogue with the EU institutions and governments to promote different effective measures, but it can go from rent control to guaranteeing that housing is a priority in the energy efficiency of buildings renovations. But we also conduct research to understand the causes, but also the solutions to homelessness. And yeah, we facilitate the exchange of information, practices, experience between the members, because we are a federation. We have a lot of members across Europe that also share the experience, and yeah, they also tackle a lot of issues. And we try to raise public awareness about the complexity of homelessness. It's not only rough sleeping, it also goes with sometimes a lot of other issues related to, for example, some people experiencing disabilities, but also addictions and other related topics that can also happen in the general population.
Okay, thank you, Alice, for that. Okay, so Gauber, lastly for you, in your work in Hungary, do you ever, I don't know what I don't really know what the general housing situation is in Hungary, but do you ever try to link it to problems that the general public might experience when it comes to housing, to try and show that maybe the differences between barriers disabled people face and the general public face may not be totally separate, to try and build empathy levels between the two?
I think we at MEOS, the organization I'm representing today, we have made this point at government consultation events, and they have those websites where you can submit your proposals for the use of EU funds, for instance. And we did make this point to connect it to broader issues of social housing and the need for accessible and affordable housing for all people, not only for disabled people. And we also are trying to lobby the government right now to recognize how important it would be that proper regulations are in place to provide legal framework and also incentives for people who want to invest in housing. So there are huge housing projects, for instance, here in the capital, Budapest, but we have no credible information about any attempts by these investors to make an effort and build accessible apartments. Not to mention that most of them are not affordable because they are too pricey for regular people. So yes, there is a broader context, and we are trying to make the case for this at the government. But the sad thing is that I think that the general discourse around disability rights mostly excludes these aspects. I think that's my own opinion and my observation, that I think at most disability rights events, we tend to focus more on deinstitutionalization and those living in residential institutions and how we should get them out of these places, which is very valid and important. It's absolutely necessary. We shouldn't forget about them, but we shouldn't forget the larger picture as well, because I think like 8 out of 10 disabled people in this country have never lived in a residential institution, but they suffer from the housing crisis. They suffer from the lack of accessible housing. If you acquire a disability during your life, say through a car accident or anything like that, you get very little to no help to make your home accessible. So how are you gonna live without government support or support from the local community? You can't. We're trying to make this point in policy making.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. That was very insightful. Yes, okay, so I think we are going to wrap it up there. So I would like to thank everybody for
sorry, Peter.
Sorry.
There is just a question in the Q&A box, or more of a comment. It says, can we have supported housing without congregating people into same buildings? Question mark. Yeah, I think that's the idea, but I don't know if anybody would like to comment.
Yeah, would anyone like to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I think. Sorry, Gabriel.
Maybe James. Go ahead.
I suppose in the context of it's how I suppose we define support really as well, isn't it? And I think the thing that I would be saying is that definitely in relation to support to enable independent living is that around supports around personal assistance, for example, if that was legalized, it might allow for more supported living to happen. So I think that's something that needs to happen at an Irish context. That's why DPOs like ourselves, Independent Living Movement Ireland, are pushing to get that legalised right. But also when we have a legalised right, we need the investment, we need the standardisation of that, because currently in Ireland as well, some of the services that support people are different in each kind of geographical area. So we need a standardised, centralised process that it will allow that. So I think we just need the support to link and to communicate with housing, and housing to also communicate. So I think we need an interagency approach, definitely, at an Irish context. So I don't know, I can't comment at a context other than that. So thanks.
Does anybody else want to give the? Does anyone else want to give the question a go, or?
I think we are over time,
Yeah.
Peter. So I
Okay. So we will wrap up there. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for our great panelists. We learned a lot. It was very informative. Thank you to our captioner, Julia. And we will have, this will be on record. This will be, you will be able to listen back and watch the episode, the webinar on YouTube, to our YouTube channel. And that's it. So thank you to everybody for coming, and we will keep an eye on how this all plays out, and we will do follow-up webinars, because housing, as we said, is an extremely key part of independent living. So we will have future. So yeah, we will follow this up with future meetings and webinars. So stay tuned, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.